Welcome to the Pet Loss Journals podcast. I am your host Louise. This podcast is all about the reality and impact pet loss has on our lives, and I will be discussing my personal journey through pet loss. So if you are struggling on your own pet loss journey, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to episode 20. Can't believe I have just about to record the 20th episode, which is crazy, but here we are. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. I really do appreciate it. This week I'm going to share a journal entry from the 29th of March 2021. I am going to jump right into it. 1 month in Cork, it has been a bit of a roller coaster, mostly emotional, grieving a lot for the dogs, a sense that I was leaving them behind or leaving their energy. I am so happy with my new life down here, exploring the area, and I know that Ozzy and Moose are giving me the strength to cope. That is this week's journal entry. So to unpack it and go into a little bit more detail for all of you listeners, I moved my life an hour and a half away from my home where both of my dogs lived with me, to be with my new partner Steve. And this was a risk I was taking, of course. It was exciting, it was scary. I was really afraid, but it was the right thing. I felt that I was ready for this change, and it was a huge change. What I definitely underestimated was the level of grief that I would feel would increase massively. Why is this, you might ask? Simply because at the time I didn't recognise that moving location, moving house is an actual grief event. It's an actual loss event. So I obviously didn't, logically think that that was something that I was going through, but it was just another layer to my grief experience that I was going through. I had just kind of presumed that, my grief experience, my losses were my 2 dogs, and that was it. Not the relationship that ended a month before I lost my dogs. But this was also a new loss. So it's just another added loss, which I did speak about in earlier episodes, about multiple losses at the same time can cause so much complicated grief and so much intense emotions that we really struggle to process at all, that we literally go offline, that our brain just can't cope with this. So as I mentioned, it was a bit of a roller coaster, mostly emotional. So that emotional roller coaster that I always speak about, and they're like, she's mentioning it again. Yes, that emotional roller coaster that I do harp on about quite a lot. And I kind of want to centre this episode a lot around the grief that we feel, or that we don't acknowledge that we feel, when it comes to moving. And a big life change, and that could be a big job change as well, career change in health. So, but particularly for me in this occasion was a big life change, like a move of location, moving house. So the fact that the main feelings and emotions that were coming up for me was a sense of loss again, that I was leaving my dogs behind in the house where they both died. And that kind of sense of leaving their energy behind. Will I be able to carry their love and energy with me in my heart to my new place of living, like to my new adventure where I'm going to move to and start a new chapter of my life? I felt such conflicting feelings around this, and to go into more detail is that those conflicting feelings are completely normal response to grief, completely normal. So I felt a sense of guilt. Why did I feel guilt? Because I felt like I was leaving them behind, leaving their memory behind. You know, will I start forgetting things about them now that I'm living somewhere new? Asking myself all these kinds of questions, so ruminating and, worrying that the memory that I hold so dear in my heart, that I cherish, of both of my dogs, will I be leaving that behind? Am I trying to run away from the grief? But I knew that I wasn't running away from the grief. The grief was still very, very present and with me daily. So, I wasn't under any assumption that I could run away from my grief physically, like in an actual different county to where I was living. But that sense of leaving them behind. And some of you that are listening may have experienced this in the form of maybe you're living in a rented accommodation and your pet passed away, and maybe you scatter the ashes or bury them in your backyard, your back garden, and you moved on from that property. You had to leave, or you bought a house, or you went into a new rental property, and there's those feelings of, oh my God, I'm leaving my pet behind. I'm leaving them behind, and that will bring up a huge wave of grief and kind of reignite that grief that we didn't expect to happen. And maybe you had already moved into a house, and all of a sudden, a few months in, it hits you. I can't believe I've left my pet behind. And this is such a common kind of statement that I hear from people. And these emotions that are attached to it are complex, and they're conflicting, and they're confusing. And it is like riding that emotional roller coaster, particularly with this. And I remember feeling so conflicted, wondering, am I doing the right thing? A lot of emotions trying to an energy pull back to my house where I had my dogs. And I do want to say that I can still go to that house. That house is my house. I can still go there. So that being said, I know that I'm not completely leaving them. I can return there, which is an absolute privilege that I can do that. Some people, they don't have that option, and that is what's really painful. That being said, my experience is not comparable. Like, you can't compare experiences. They're both equally individual and unique, and the intensity levels of that grief is both individual and unique. So the fact that the sense of that their energy wouldn't be with me anymore was really upsetting to me, and created a huge amount of sadness and a huge amount of really guilt that I was leaving, and would I be able to keep that kind of spiritual connection with them? Because I often say that even though the physical aspect of the relationship has ended with my dogs, that spiritual and emotional relationship can live on. It really, really can. And there are signs that I receive, like little robins that I've spoken about before, and there are certain times that I will feel their energy, or when I ask them for help or guidance or love or support or healing for something, that I will ask them, I will talk to them, and I will say, please give me this strength today, Ozzy and Moose, for whatever reason I need it for. So that is keeping that spiritual an emotional connection alive, and it's not just dying when they die, if you understand me. So if you're listening and you're feeling something similar, or you've experienced something familiar, moving house, and those feelings of grief arising, these are completely normal. It's normal to feel that way. Try to communicate that with somebody close to you. Try to kind of open that book, open that up a little bit and journal on it even, and just say, look, and I was really open with my partner, and I said, I'm feeling these emotions. This is what's coming up for me. I don't regret my decision. I'm feeling like this new wave of grief has hit me because I've totally uprooted my life and changed my location. And thankfully he was so supportive, and he really was that listening ear that I needed, and reassured me and everything else. And you can have that with your friendships, your family, your own partners, that just don't be scared to say, look, I'm really feeling this way. I'm really feeling this guilt or this anxiety or sadness because I've uprooted my life away from everything that was familiar, that familiar pattern of behaviour. So grief is that familiar pattern of behaviour that is now ended, like the death of our beloved pets. We were used to this way of life, our patterns, our schedules, our familiar pattern of behaviour. And once that completely and utterly changes, that peels off nearly another layer of grief that we're experiencing. So, like, really be gentle. And there was so much change in my life after they passed away that it was like a layer of an onion. It just kept peeling back the layers of grief, that another change, a job change, this kind of thing, and lots of different changes in my personal life that just created this really complex roller coaster of that grief that I just was like, wow, this is overwhelming, and how am I going to deal with this? And asking myself all of these questions. As I said at the end of the journal entry, I know Ozzy and Moose are giving me the strength to cope. And this was a regular thing that I would write in my journal, or that I would say in my mind's eye, for example, that I would ask them for strength, or I'd ask them for healing or help to comfort me, or please help me to sleep. And that is a way that I found helpful for processing my grief. As simple as that. It sounds so simple, but the more that I did this, the more often that I did this, and often these journal entries I would sign off by, love you, Ozzy and Moose. And it's like almost each journal entry that I was writing to them more often than not. So, and that isn't something I've shared so far. So that is a snippet. So when I'm journaling, I was often journaling to them. Some days I didn't, some days I did. It was very sporadic. I didn't have set rules when it came to journaling. It was really just freehand and get my thoughts out so that they aren't ruminating in my brain and taking over my thought process, 24/7. I was getting it out. And funnily enough, I was working with a client recently, and she was telling me how she had always journaled even before we started working together, and that she found it so beneficial, and she continues it on. And it's amazing to hear that, because we see it on social media all the time, the push for journaling, and write your feelings down and get them on paper and buy these lovely journals. And there's lovely ones to buy that are really intricate and very posh, some of them, and some of them are just plain and simple notebooks, and that's okay too. But you hear it a lot that you see the people are journaling, but at the end of the day, there's so many people that that don't actually put pen to paper. They never actually do it. They say that they buy the journals and they say that they're going to do it. They have wonderful intentions, like many of us do with different tasks and things in our life that we want to do, but actually getting down to just beginning a journal, to just start it, because many people just overthink it, and it doesn't have to be so complicated. A lot of people want to have a structure to it. And I myself, kept a gratitude journal for a couple of years. There was an actual gratitude journal that would have the prompts in it every single day of the week. And I did that, and I found that really helpful. And then I kind of moved from doing that into the freehand writing journal as well. And now that I have released the journal prompts guide that is linked at the bottom of my podcast episodes, that is completely free for you to download. These journal prompts are specifically for people that are going through that pet loss journey or anticipating a near, loss of their pet that is approaching very quickly. And what these journal prompts, these are specific, and then this is a case of get your journal out and write out the journal prompt at the start of the page and free write your feelings and your thoughts. But how that is different is that's helping to process those painful feelings of grief that we often push down and suppress. So that's starting that process. That's starting to help to process that awful grief that's just hit you. Even a sense of numbness and shock that has hit you at the beginning. Even doing one or two of those journal prompts can be absolutely extremely helpful for people to really just take the focus off that rumination of the events of what happened, and just to hone in and focus a little bit on that relationship that they had with their absolutely adorable pet that was in their lives. Just even if it's, what have you learned from the relationship with your pet, or what was the most joyful moment you experienced with your pet. These kinds of questions can just give you that reprieve from that really intense grief that you're feeling. It can break that negative thought pattern, that absolute spiraling of thoughts, those post-traumatic stress flashbacks that I speak about, I had experienced before. It can interrupt those, and it can help you to focus temporarily on the relationship, on sections and snippets of the relationship you had with your pet. So I could talk about journaling, obviously, for another 20 minutes of this podcast episode, but at the end of the day, whatever way that you feel that you want to journal. Don't overthink it. If you need help at starting it, you can download the journal prompts if you're specifically wanting to journal about your pet loss grief. But in general, if you are looking just to journal on your day-to-day life and the stresses and strains of life, then freehand in a notebook, nothing special, just get it all out on paper. The overthinking of it, and trying to think of affirmations to write down, or what's the right way to phrase a gratitude, or all of these questions that we overthink, because in the wellness world and in the spiritual world, and there's steps and there's a process for everything. But what I really want to hone in on is there's no linear timeline for grief. Obviously, I've spoke about this before. There is no stages of grief. Grief has its own waves, its own ups and downs, and everything in between. And there's just going to be so much that you can learn from experiencing loss, that there's just going to be so much to get down on paper, and that in itself is incredibly healing and helps you to process all of the mumble jumble in your brain that's happening and all of the overwhelm that you're feeling and the anxiety. So that is my little tip of the day, and really coincides with this journal entry this week. And the fact that if somebody listening has experienced or is experiencing a really, really difficult loss, and has been putting off something in their life that they had planned to do, for example, a move, or for example, a change in career, or maybe they want to go traveling, and maybe there's something that they always wanted to do, book a trip or visit a friend that's abroad or overseas, or whatever that may be. I would encourage to lean into that. That is something that I did. Every cell in my body was telling me to stay put. That the fear of, if this relationship doesn't work out, there's another loss, Louise. But I didn't want to live my life that way. I wanted to lean into the uncomfortableness that I was feeling, lean into the fear of it, because if there's one thing that I learned from the relationships with my dogs, is that the joy that they gave me was so unique, and they just exuded unconditional love. And I've always been under the assumption that you can't receive unconditional love from another human being. And I've always believed that since I was very young. And I've always just believed that only exists with the animals that we share our lives with, or that become part of our lives. But I am changing that narrative. I'm changing that narrative now that I have been open to the fact that unconditional love can indeed exist, human to human. And that is something that I worked hard to change my belief system around, because I was very closed off to thinking these things. But if there is something that you are looking to do that you have put off, and you feel, I'm in the middle of grief, I am just not able for this, just write about it and say, what would my life look like if I did said thing that I said that I wanted to do, or made that life change that I said that I wanted to do? What would my life look like? Would that be really scary? Or would it be a new adventure? Would it be a new prospect, something new in my life that I can welcome? Our pets want us to be happy, and our pets would not want us to be miserable and stagnant in life, and they would want us to be joyous and want us to jump into those new adventures. They really, really would. And I did feel like that with Ozzy and Moose. I know that they would want me to be happy, the most happiest version of myself that I could get to. And just thinking like that and repeating those phrases, silently to myself, is what's been really helpful. So I hope that you resonated with something on this week's episode, and I hope that it's given you some food for thought and some maybe possible questions to ask yourself that you can journal about that might be really helpful. Don't forget that the link to the free journal prompts guide will be in the show notes, and if anybody would like to reach out to me, all my contact details are there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this week's episode. Remember, your pet loss grief is real, and it is so valid. Please be gentle on yourself. Until next time, take care.